any disclosures of pecuniary interest and the general nature thereof? Okay, seeing none. We don't have any presentations tonight, and we don't have any public hearings, but we do have a delegation, and I should have asked how to pronounce the last name. We have Mr. Sean, I'm just going to say, take a stab at it, Galbraith.
Correct.
Oh, good, all right. From Bell Mobility regarding the new cell program for Ontario municipalities. So if the little red light is on, okay, then whenever you're ready.
Thank you very much. Am I on?
Yep.
Thank you very much. My name is Sean Galbraith. I'm a consultant for Bell. And Bell is rolling out across the province new technology called small cell. And this is in response to significantly rising demand for data services. You can pretty much place a call, anywhere, but data is what's driving network demand these days. Specifically, between 2014 and 2019, the demand for data on the network is going to increase about 700%. And that is Netflix videos, that's social media, all of that is data driven, and it is putting a significant strain on the network, much larger than we might have anticipated a few years ago, and so we need to build more cell towers effectively. In areas where we have residential density, people don't like large cell towers, which we would traditionally build in the past, so we are moving towards a new program that's called small cell. And these are, as the name would imply, small antenna boxes that we can place on light poles. That's basically what they look like. They're low power. They don't cover a large area, so we would distribute a number of these on a number of light posts in a community. But we're able to deploy them just about anywhere. They're all fed off fiber optic backbones. We would have to run fiber to each of these sites. And then we also have another thing that I'll mention as well called picocell. They basically look like a large smoke detector, and we can put those inside buildings like the arena, community centers, things like that, to provide better service inside a building where the walls might be blocking some of the signal strength. Basically what they look like is a small box hanging off the side of a utility pole. Those are the various power and fiber connections. Here's an example of one sort of before and after. You can see, is that little laser pointer? Nope, that didn't work at all. Was it wrong button? Sorry about that. Thank you. Well, you can see there the small box hanging off the side of the light post. They're pretty unobtrusive. They can be painted to match, especially in heritage areas where we want to make sure that they're as unobtrusive as possible. Here's one mounted to the side of a building. You can see that the sort of upper right area. Again, it's painted to match the building. Sometimes we need a little extra height, in which case it's on a little mat above the top of a building. And so what we've given a presentation to staff already, and they were supportive. What we'll be looking for is to enter into what's called a master lease agreement with Wainfleet that would allow Bell to deploy these small cell boxes on municipal infrastructure where we can in Wainfleet. There's a lease that has been circulated to staff in the past, so they can have a look at it and ask any questions. I can answer any questions. We don't expect it for free. We pay, there's a set amount in the lease per location to cover hydro and rent. And then if Wainfleet is interested in this program, we would also throw in sort of for free the picocell installations and things like the arena, for example. that's basically it. So if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. That was pretty quick.
That was great, thank you. Thank you for the presentation. Are there any questions from council members? Alderman Hassels.
If you had it in the municipality, are you asking for exclusive rights then, or
No.
any?
Not exclusive. The other big two, Rogers and the Wind, I'm not aware of them deploying technology like this. But if they were to come in and have their own agreement, they would be welcome to do so. We wouldn't prefer them on the same pole, but if there's two light poles next to each other, they can go on one, we can be on the other. It's certainly not exclusive. But this would only be for the benefit of Bell and TELUS network improvements. It wouldn't help Rogers subscribers or Wind subscribers. They would have to sort of do their own thing. For those networks, it would be a pretty big improvement in terms of data speed and availability of data services in those areas that it's deployed. Especially in terms of if you have special events, like at Heritage Park, where you have a larger group of people coming together for an event, that can really drain the available network capacity, and so this helps even that out a fair bit.
Okay, any further questions from council? Alderman Conk?
Through you, Madam Mayor. Thank you for coming out to give us that information. Can you give us an idea on how many of these boxes you might be thinking of putting up in the township?
Sure. So we've received information from staff about, basically, we asked staff, tell us where you think this would be good to deploy. And they've provided us with a few areas and a map showing the streetlight locations. And that's been a really great help. We would take that information and provide it to the engineers at Bell to actually design the network once the agreements are in place. Each of these small cell boxes, they don't cover a large area, only about 150, 200 meters or so. So we would need, a few of them around. They wouldn't be used in the more predominantly rural areas. For rural areas, we still need the big towers, simply because we would just need so many of them, and there's just one house here, a farmhouse there. But I believe staff's preferral, at least to start, would be in this area, and then down towards some of the water's edge communities, and then see how that goes and maybe roll it out a little bit more. But the total number, I don't have an estimate right now. That will sort of come later once we start designing the network.
I think our CAO wanted to comment.
Yeah, thank you, through you, your worship. So just to further follow up on that conversation to Alderman Conk is that Mr. Nan and I have met with Mr. Gilbraith and his colleagues from Bell. We have received all the documentation. Process-wise would entail Mr. Nan and I authoring a report for council and bringing that back for consideration. Because one of the things that's been identified is that the internet availability in the township is, something that we want to work towards. And just another important point is that we've also been having some dialogue with Bell, is because some residents in the township have had difficulty with their high-speed internet at the 899 number. So we're working with Bell to work on that. I know Mr. Gilbraith and some of his colleagues are working on the Bell side to see what we can do from the township to help some of those customers get a better, faster internet service.
Okay, any further questions from council members? Okay, seeing none, thank you so much for the presentation. We appreciate you coming and giving us an update, and I will look forward to talking to you again.
You're welcome.
Okay, thank you. So I need a motion then to receive that presentation. So moved by Alderman Gilmore and seconded by Alderman Dykstra. All those in favor, that's carried. I don't know if there's any business arising from delegations. I know we're still working to modify this, but we're not quite there yet. So I don't see anybody nodding or putting their hand up. So now we'll go into my mayor's remarks really quickly. So I'll start off, I participated in the grape stomp on the 17th, and I want to thank staff because they really helped me out, and we raised the most food per capita, so that was really good. Everybody was really impressed. And then I was really sick that day, and I managed to make it into the final heat, but I did not win. I'm sorry that I let everybody down, but I will go back next year and do my best. Port Cares is celebrating their 30th anniversary, so I went to Port Colborne last week or maybe it was even the week before, to fly the flag, and I was notified today, I believe we are flying it outside. It's up, I see Richard nodding, so that's fantastic. We kind of shared that with them. I wanted to mention the Fall Fair. It was a great success. I know I had a great time. The parade was amazing. It gets better and better every year. And Len McEwen did a fantastic job. I know they had great weather and it looked like it was great attendance. I didn't see the fireworks, but I could hear them all the way at my house. So I figured everything went really well, so that was good. And we had our special meeting last week regarding the strategic plan, and then there will be a follow-up meeting on the 11th, and then there will also be public engagement before the strat plan's completed, because I know there were some questions about that on Facebook, and I have responded, but I wanted to acknowledge that in my mayor's remarks. And there will be a budget workshop at the region this Thursday morning, and regional council in the evening. This weekend, as we know, is Thanksgiving weekend with many events across the region, including the Balls Falls Festival. I mentioned that because I will be there 2 days this weekend. And our office will be closed on Monday. And also wanted to mention I will be attending Mayor Campion's United Way breakfast next Wednesday. That's in Welland at Casadante. And then there will be another budget meeting at the region next Thursday, the 13th, raiser for the earthquake victims in Italy on the 14th at the Italian Hall. So I've been invited to that. I'm going to attend that with Mayor Maloney. And Carrie from the library has coordinated Mayor's Storytime again this year on the 17th, and she typically hosts it in the fire hall. So usually she suggests what I dress up as or what her theme is. So you're more than welcome to come watch me read to the kids. It's always a fun time. And the next Conservation Authority Board meeting is October 19th, and our next council meeting is October 25th. And I just wanted to make a note, we've had all kinds of different transition, as everybody knows, within the office here. So I just want to thank staff. They've been doing a great job. It's been a long kind of journey, but they're forging ahead with us, so I just wanted to acknowledge that and appreciate that. Okay, so now we will move on to the adoption of the minutes.
That the minutes of the regular meeting of council held on September 13th, 2016 be adopted as circulated.
So I need a mover and a seconder for the minutes. Moved by Alderman Hessels and seconded by Alderman Gilmore. Were there any errors or omissions or changes that needed to be made? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor, and that's carried. And then we'll go into our first report.
Administrative Staff Report ASR 31/2016 regarding the appointment of an Integrity Commissioner and recommendations contained therein be adopted as circulated.
Mover and a seconder for that report. Moved by Alderman Dykstra and seconded by Alderman Gilmore. Were there any questions or comments on this report? Alderman Conk.
Through you, Madam Mayor, to be frankly honest, I do not support this at all. But I am wondering, however, we do engage the services of LAS, do we not? And do they not do this?
I think there is a difference. I think LAS does a different function. I could be wrong, but I will have Mike speak to it if he's good with that.
Yes, through you, Madam Mayor, to Alderman Conk. So LAS does provide some services, but typically what happens, they don't have jurisdiction over this type of thing. So as council's aware, they approved the code of conduct a few months back on August 2nd. And as part of that, what happens is if council does not consider an integrity commissioner, it automatically goes to the Ombudsman Office of Ontario, who takes jurisdiction of that. Typically, in my experience, and certainly Sarah, our acting clerk, could further, I was going to call you Smith, but anyway, congratulations, by the way. So what would happen is typically the first recommendation from the ombudsman when the council has a code of conduct is council should consider appointing an integrity commissioner. So we're trying to be out a little ahead of the curve to present this report to you, but LAS has a number of services, but an integrity commissioner is not one of those services at this time.
Okay, any other questions from council members? Okay, seeing none, then I will call the question. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? Okay, and that's carried. Okay, and now we'll go on to the auditor's report.
Administrative staff report, ASR 32, 2016, regarding the 2015 auditor's report, the 2015 draft financial report, and the recommendations contained therein be adopted as circulated.
I need a mover and a seconder for that, Alderman Conk and Alderman Gilmore, and then I'm just gonna let Mike speak real quick.
So Mayor and members of council, I'd like to take the opportunity to introduce, we have a as you're aware, we're in the process of recruiting a full-time manager of corporate services, treasurer/clerk. In the meantime, we have a contract treasurer working with us in the office. Paul Ciapana. Mr. Ciapana is here to answer any questions. Financial statements are something that he's been diligently working on with Mallory Louie, our deputy clerk, or deputy treasurer rather, and we're here to address any questions that council may have related to the financial statements.
Okay, so does anybody have any questions regarding the audit? Okay, seeing none, I will call the question. All those in favor, and that's carried.
Administrative staff report, ASR 33, 2016, regarding the health and safety audit, financial report, final report, and the recommendations contained therein be adopted as circulated.
Mover and seconder, Alderman Dykstra and Alderman Gilmore, and again, I will hand it over to Mike.
Great, thank you, Your Worship. So just to introduce back in May 31st, I had authored a report to bring to council to recommend doing a complete health and safety audit on the entire operations within the township. I'm pleased to announce that audit has been completed, and I would like to introduce Mr. Dave Fretz from the Public Services Health and Safety Association to give you a presentation on the final results of that particular audit.
There we go, it's up front for us. Thank you, Michael. And thank you for the opportunity to provide the results of the audit that we conducted for the township. I put together a few slides just to highlight some of our findings. The audit itself, it's a difficult audit to score well on. Due to the fact that it takes into account 3 separate items. We reviewed your existing documentation, your health and safety program, if you will, and compared it to legislative requirements, best practice requirements, and township requirements. We took that documentation review and interviewed a number of your staff from management, supervisors, Joint Health and Safety Committee member, and frontline workers, just to see their understanding of the documentation that you had. And then in addition to that, we also score on this audit a site validation where we took a look at 9 of your locations, all of your fire stations, as well as your existing buildings here. And looking for proof of that documentation as a living entity, if you will, at your sites. So it's a 3-pronged approach. So you may score well in one area, but if it doesn't correlate down the line into the other two areas, it affects the score. The actual audit elements, there's 18 of them. The health and safety policy, senior management commitment, responsibilities of the workplace parties, there's employer, supervisor, worker, contractor, visitor, health and safety officer, or who looks after your safety program, the implementation of it, posted documents, hazard identification and control, your standards and procedures for the work that you do, health and safety representative, that's really, you have the joint health and safety committee, so that health and safety rep isn't in effect. But training, first aid requirements, health and safety inspections, incident injury investigations, early and safe return to work, and contract administration. So that, in effect, is your safety program. So we took a look at all those elements. Results of the audit, the documentation, 38.42%. And again, I don't want to qualify it, but it is a difficult audit. So your documentation, 38.42%. With the interviews from staff, you can see they range from 49% at the employer to 38% at the worker. Their knowledge of your safety program and the components of it. And the site validation inspections, 44.83%. First time through an audit like this, it's a snapshot of where you are, and it's not a horrible score, but there is some work to do. I'd like to look at it as opportunities for improvement. Safety programs are an ongoing animal, if you like, and there are opportunities for improvement here. I took a couple slides just to show you. There's obviously dozens of these in the audit, but if you look at a positive here, the health and safety policy, you can see that across the board you scored well there. And as the other end of the scale, take training, for example, your documents regarding training, and across the board, the knowledge of your staff regarding that training showed some lower results. Opportunities for improvement in your documentation, updating of existing township policies and procedures. I believe your documents were dated 2007, so there's been some legislative changes that you need to update, as well as some missing policies and procedures that are required by legislation. Documentation requirements, and the documentation was lacking in a number of areas. You may be doing some of these things, but you're not documenting that you're doing them. And a dedicated position to fulfill an action plan. You're going to see that kind of repeated on a few of these slides, because if you are going forward with these opportunities for improvement, there is a time commitment, and a budgetary commitment. So having the work spread across the existing staff as it's being done now came up clear in the interview process, where health and safety often gets dropped off the side because there's just too many other things to do in the tasks that people have already. Another example of how we present the audit, and just briefly here, the positive here, senior management commitment above 2. The blue is the actual score, and the red is a possible score, so you can see you scored well there. Needing work, hazard identification and control, which is element 10, where your risk assessments, your job hazard analysis, we just didn't find evidence of. Some interview results. On the positive side, above element 13, you can see the blue is the actual score again, and the red is the possible score. That's your Joint Health and Safety Committee. Knowledge of staff about that committee, who's on the committee, what they do, their reporting, etc. And needing work, you can see element 10, which is hazard identification and control. Again, the risk assessments just weren't there to score well on. Some comments and priority recommendations. Over the next couple of slides here, I'll address these, but senior management commitment, health and safety roles and responsibilities, risk assessments and job hazard analysis, your inspections, compliance issues, and documentation. So senior management commitment, creation of some type of formal health and safety continuous improvement plan to demonstrate the level of commitment for promoting health and safety in the workplace. The needs to determine what you will do and when you're going to do it. Responsibilities, ensure clear accountability for safety by revising the roles and responsibilities document and communicating to all staff. It was evident that staff weren't aware of a number of the policies that you have in place. They were doing their roles and responsibilities, just not understanding the specific requirements noted in the documents. Review management roles and responsibilities with all levels of management, and again, explore that potential for a formal safety position. Hazard identification and control, conducting a risk assessment for all your occupations, and then from that risk assessment, determining which ones are high and medium risk activities, and then developing job hazard analysis for those so that you have some safe operating procedures for your staff to follow. In other words, a document that they can follow, and that was lacking currently. And then communicating these to the employees. The procedures that you did have in place, a number of them, the staff weren't aware that they were in existence. Standards and procedures, review and update existing procedures, identify and develop missing procedures, and then communicating these procedures to the workers. Under training, develop a training matrix to identify required training and to track employee training status. As an example of training refreshers that have slipped through the cracks, that's to the point where you have employees who have expired training. An example would be first aid certificates that had expired. So who gets what training and when that training takes place. So that's what the training matrix would help your day-to-day functions, ensuring that the training stays up to date. Inspections, develop a formal health and safety inspection procedure, including all levels of management. Relying heavily here on the Joint Health and Safety Committee to conduct your inspections, but there's a requirement for all levels of the organization to do inspections. And there's a positive here because your managers, your supervisors, and your employees are all doing those inspections, but there's a lack of documentation on those. And due diligence, which comes if something were to happen, you'd have difficulty providing proof that you in fact were doing your inspections. Safety communications, posting boards should be kept accessible, visible, current, uncluttered. Identifying the required documents and then ensuring that they're posted. Relatively well done. There were some missing documents there. So that's a low-hanging fruit basically that can be corrected fairly quickly. So just in summary, as far as an action plan, liability for non-compliance, basically to prove your due diligence if something were to happen. That's the, I guess, the ultimate concern. The loss potential, ensuring that your workers do have a safe workplace to work in, so that you can limit the incidents that are occurring. The next three, difficult to implement, time to complete, and resources required. To do any of this, there is a commitment, and as I mentioned earlier, one of the findings was that tacking it on to another job or an existing job just didn't seem to be working. That came through in the employee interviews, the workers, supervisors, and management interviews. Little steps yield big results, and we see this all the time in audits. This is a snapshot of where you are today, and anything that you can do to produce an action, some of these things in your action plan, raise that bar, raise your score. It is just a number, but it did show that documentation is lacking. And that's my last slide. It surprised me. Came up quick. Any questions? I know it's a large document. I think it's 118 pages long, but I'm here to answer any questions, or in the future if you have questions as well.
Okay, thank you for the presentation. Does anybody have any questions for Mr. Fretz? Okay, none? All right. Well, thank you for the presentation.
You're welcome.
And we have it out on the floor. So were there any questions or discussion regarding the report? Okay, so seeing none, then we've got the recommendations. So I will call the question. All those in favor? Opposed, if any, and that's carried. All right, now we'll go on to the next report.
Fire staff report, FSR 33, 2016, regarding fire operation review final report, and the recommendations contained therein be adopted as circulated.
I need a mover and a seconder for this report. Moved by Alderman Dykstra and seconded by Alderman Gilmore, and the CAO wishes to comment on this report as well.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. To members of council, just to put some context around what the process related to this particular report. So council will recall on May 31st of 2016, the recommendation from myself to do an operational review on a number of areas within the township. The first being our fire fighting and emergency services area. As you're fully aware, Mr. Steve Thurlow from Dillon Consulting has been engaged and has worked his way through a process to come up to this final result. So just to be clear on what the report is tonight, as council is not being asked, there's been some confusion in the process. Council is not being asked to make any decisions on this particular report tonight other than to receive it and to direct the fire chief to report back with a proposed implementation plan and further directions at the next report, or at the next meeting on October 25th. Council will also acknowledge or note they received an email earlier today from the fire chief. It is a 20-page report. The supplementary report to this particular item is almost 225 pages. That will be made available to council and it will be made available to the public adjoining the October 25th report. So tonight is a snapshot, a presentation from Mr. Thurlow, just to start the dialogue related to that. So just to remind council, you're not being asked to make any decisions tonight. Council will have an opportunity to meet individually with the fire chief to start to get into this particular thing. The fire chief will be meeting with the association and his team to further discuss what's in this report as we bring back a recommended approach to starting to move some of the recommendations outlined. So I would introduce Mr. Thurlow to give us a presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Madam Mayor, members of council, on behalf of Dillon Consulting and our team, it's my pleasure actually to be in front of you tonight. I know you recognize me as the face that's been through this process, but I can assure you there's a very large team that has worked diligently to prepare this documentation and complete this analysis. My goal tonight is very simply to walk through some of the key elements of the report, specifically with respect to the recommendations. I want to talk about the strategic priorities we've identified, and then following the template of your current fire master plan, I want to work through each of the divisions and the recommendations that we've identified with respect to each of those divisions. When we set forth on this project working with you, we had a number of objectives. The first was to review the status of the 2013 Fire Master Plan recommendations, to assess your compliance with the current legislated requirements within the province. And there have been a number of changes since 2013 that we've looked at. We have viewed this as an opportunity to provide some more education to council, and certainly we hope with the community in respect to the programs and the services that the department currently provides. We believe this review will provide council and staff with an evidence-based strategic framework for delivering fire protection services. As Mr. Smith indicated, it is a very lengthy report. It is very much data and analysis driven and very technical, and so it will take some time for a reader to read through it. And I think you've developed a very key process in going forward to do that type of analysis. We also believe there's been an opportunity to engage the stakeholders for input, certainly within the department with the volunteers and with staff and with council. You have seen this particular slide from me before, that the Fire Protection and Prevention Act is one of the key pieces of legislation we want to ensure the township complies with, in addition to the conversation you've just had in respect to occupational health and safety being the second piece. Under the FPPA, there's two components we want to look at. First being your program for public education and fire prevention, which evolves into looking at your need for a simplified risk assessment, a home smoke alarm program, distribution of educational materials, and inspections upon complaint or request. The B section of the legislation speaks to other fire protection services, which in reality is very much about how you deliver fire suppression or firefighting services. And the way the legislation reads, that is defined by council based on your analysis of local needs and circumstances. Within Ontario, we have come to, over the past decade, rely on what we call the 3 lines of defense model. It's defined as the first line of defense being prevention and education. And you can see by the slide the various programs that are typically included within that strategy. The second being fire safety standards and code enforcement, very much relying upon our ability to use legislation and use inspections and education programs. And the third being ultimately emergency response, that if we're unable to mitigate or avoid having an incident through the first 2 lines of defense, ultimately we need a capable and effective firefighting response team. Within the stakeholder engagement, which I believe has been a very informative and important piece of this work, we've had a chance to talk to council on a number of occasions. The Fire Master Plan Implementation Committee that you have in place that is working through the 2013 project. Certainly had time with Mr. Smith to have some very frank and clear conversations. It's been an interesting element to have the chance to speak to both your retired fire chief and your current fire chief to get different perspectives, both on the history of the department as well as some ideas on the future of the department. Your part-time fire prevention officer provided valuable insight, as did the fire administrative assistant who works on a part-time basis. And certainly a key component of the consultation was with the Firefighters Association, specifically with the association president. I had quite an interesting and extensive interview with him. And we had an evening with the volunteer firefighters whereby we presented a presentation and sought their direct consultation, their direct input into the review. Within the report in front of you, which is in essence an executive summary of the larger supplemental report, there are 44 recommendations. Ultimately, as I've indicated, was to update the findings and recommendations of the 2013 Fire Master Plan. Within the main body or the supplemental report, you will see our high-level implementation plan. Within that plan, we have divided the recommendations into 2 elements. The first being those that we have identified as council recommendations. In our view, those are reflected as ones that will require council's direct consideration and approval. Within this presentation, we've highlighted them in blue so that you can be aware of them and recognize them as ones that will fall directly within your area. We have also identified a number of other recommendations that in our view are operational in nature. And in our view, they can be implemented within the current delegated authority of the fire chief and within his capacity that we have granted. So starting with strategic priority, we've identified 3 areas that we think should guide you as a council in setting forth how you are going to deliver fire protection services into the future. So if we had a blank sheet of paper, these very much form those strategic directions. The first being that the Township of Wainfleet provide a leadership role within the community in support of other township employees' participation as volunteer firefighters and other township employers in supporting volunteer fighters within the township. You may recall during our discussions some of the challenges the department has on recruitment and retention of volunteer firefighters. The township has embarked on trying to encourage current employees to also participate as volunteers. We see this strategic priority very much building on that framework that you have begun to establish and taking that leadership role into the township with other employers. Volunteer firefighters are very much currently the core element of your fire department. You rely on them, but I can tell you that in our experience, the recruitment and retention of volunteer firefighters is a significant challenge, not only within this province, but across this country. The second strategic priority very much aligns with that 3 lines of defense I just presented to you. What we're suggesting is that wherever possible, you optimize the use of the first 2 lines of defense, including public education, fire prevention, and the utilization of fire safety standards enforcement to provide a comprehensive fire protection program. We have learned, and there's very strong evidence within this province, that mitigating or reducing the possibility of having the fire is the most successful strategy to mitigate the event before it happens. If you're familiar with one of the most recent coroner's inquests in this province with respect to the number of fire fatalities, those recommendations strongly enforce that the first 2 lines of defense must be our priority as a society and as municipal leaders. The third priority we've identified is that we place emphasis on strategies that support the sustainability of fire protection services, provide the most effective and efficient level of fire protection services, resulting in the best value for the community. You have one of the most effective models being a volunteer fire department, certainly from a cost perspective. It can also be a very effective operational model to provide a very, very good level of service. There are, however, some challenges, and we will talk to them as we walk through the recommendations of the report. Madam Mayor, I would ask that as we go through the recommendations, if there are any questions with respect to any of them as I go through them, that we do it as per slide. My technical abilities with this going forward and backwards is limited, so if possible we could do that, that'd be great.
Okay, so I'll ask then, before we get too far ahead, if has anything gotten anybody wanting to ask any questions, or we're good to move forward and then go slide by slide. I'll try to watch for hands up. Okay, I think we're good to continue.
Thank you very much. So, as I said to you at the onset, although it may be hard to identify, we've identified those council area recommendations in blue. So all of the recommendations on this slide are council-driven recommendations. The first being that the proposed Wainfleet Fire Emergency Service organizational model contained within this review be presented to council for consideration and approval. And I will walk through that, the elements of that organizational model, both within this slide and on the next slide. I actually have the model and we can talk through it. Recommendation number 2 goes to the point of developing the position of volunteer assistant chief. We've identified that within the review and implement it as it has been identified within the review, within the organizational model. Members of the council will recall that within your current fire master plan, there was a recommendation to develop the position of district chief. As the plan works through its implementation and consultation with the volunteers, the title of that position, the roles and responsibilities of that position transition to the title of platoon chief. In our view, that rank or that role very much aligns with what we would see in a full-time fire department versus a volunteer fire department. What we are recommending with the term volunteer assistant chief, in our view, addresses a number of organizational challenges the department has. And I'll talk through that more as I walk through the recommendations, but certainly there's a lot of analysis and benefits we believe into developing this position. We actually recommend that you have 3 of them, and assigning some very specific roles and responsibilities administratively to assist the fire chief in his role. Now, recommendation number 3 speaks to the proposed organizational committee structure that we've identified. That very much goes hand in hand with what I just spoke to. We've identified an opportunity to create an enhanced communication within the department. We believe that by developing 4 committees, one looking after and leading the area of training, one leading the area of operating guidelines and procedures, another in the apparatus and equipment, and the 4th being in the prevention side. It very much aligns with the strategic priorities of this plan. It very much aligns, quite frankly, with the occupational health and safety audit presentation you just had. And what we see is that each one of those volunteer assistant chiefs would play an administrative role in being the chair of one of those committees, and your part-time fire prevention officer would lead the 4th committee. So I'll just link this, Madam Mayor, to the previous slide. What you have on the right-hand side is our proposed organizational structure. It does include the implementation of 3 volunteer assistant chiefs. You can see them in the middle. We do recommend throughout the plan that you increase the number of volunteer firefighters at each station to a total complement of 20. So if you look on the right-hand side, you'll see at the bottom, we start with a complement of 16 volunteer firefighters, then 3 captains, and that would be within a specific district, and then above that, 1 volunteer assistant chief. That volunteer assistant chief at that level would, in our view, become part of the senior management team working with the fire chief, as well as having responsibility for a specific response district within the community. On the top of the slide, in the blue colored, you can see that you have your fire chief. We have the current part-time administrative assistant. On the left-hand side, you do have a training officer, although volunteer currently. We will talk about some changes to that position within the remaining recommendations. And on the right-hand side, you have your part-time fire prevention and public education officer. I will speak to that at this point is throughout the process of your implementation over the next couple of years, we do see that part-time fire prevention and public education position transitions to a full-time position.
I think we have a question from Alderman Dykstra.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Through you, Madam Mayor. Steve, just in regards to your org chart and your recommendation of 3 part-time deputy chiefs, you're talking about District 1, 2, and 3. Are you talking about fire halls?
At this point in time, that's part of a transition process, but you will see within the recommendations as we move forward, we are recommending a 3-station model.
Okay, so I did see that further down in the report, but the reason I'm asking is your report's pointing at 3, but we have 4. And I know you said the recommendation, but why would your report not treat it as 4 stations going forward until your recommendation that says that we should go down to 3?
Through Madam Mayor, what I'm trying to present to you here is the combined strategy. Within the report, we are recommending a 3-station model. To support that model will require, in our view, that organizational model. We understand and fully accept there's going to be a transition to get there. And during that transition period, you may at certain times have some flexibility in this model, but ultimately this is where we want you to get to. It matches the station location model we're recommending.
And we have Alderman Comp.
volunteer assistant chiefs, you're also recommending that they not be part of the association. So how would they get paid?
Through you, Madam Chair, how they would get paid would be very much up to council in the same way that you have a contractual agreement with your fire chief. It would be separate than how you do it today with your volunteers.
Well, to be honest, that worries me in that if they're not going to be part of the association who receives an honorarium at the end of the year, this kind of points to these three people eventually becoming staff. And call me crazy, but I see this further down the road as evolving into one of them being a deputy fire chief, which we can't afford. So those are just my own observations. I do have one more question, two more questions actually on this section. Can you tell us right now how many volunteers we currently have?
I may have to refer to the fire chief because that has changed through the duration of the actual review. It's changed.
I'm going to make a best guess off the top of my head. I believe we were somewhere around 46, something like that. I don't know the exact number off the top of my head, but I can find that out for you.
Okay, so we would be looking at trying to find another 16 bodies approximately to get to 60. Because you're recommending 20 per station and 3 stations, that's 60 volunteers. Right?
Yes.
Okay. That might be difficult. And then on section 2 of recommendation 11, you're asking to have a program put together. I'm wondering what the program would look like, and would the fire prevention officer be responsible for creating that program?
Madam Mayor, I think Councilor, you've jumped quite a bit ahead of me. If you could just keep that recommendation for a second, I think we can get there.
All right.
I would just like to capture a few of your comments. Having an association on the volunteer side of the department is not common in the province. It is certainly something that is developing, but typically in volunteer departments, we don't see organized volunteers as you have here. So there are many examples across this province of volunteer fire departments that work in the absence of having the type of collective agreement that you do have with your volunteers. So there are many examples of how you could compensate what we're proposing, and we can certainly provide those. I know the fire chief is very familiar with those types of examples, and it's not our intent that at any time these would transition into full-time positions. With respect to the number of volunteers, within the body of the report, you will see the analysis that speaks to the fact that from an insurance perspective, so the fire underwriters who set the insurance rates in the province, one of their minimum benchmarks is there must be, in a volunteer-operated department, a minimum of 15 volunteer firefighters assigned at each fire station before it receives any acceptable recognition as a fire station. When we started the review, at least 2 of your stations did not have 15 firefighters. And so part of our concept of why we are consolidating 2 stations is take advantage of that and to actually develop a core component of 20 at each station. We're hoping we don't lose any, we garner some more, but one of the primary reasons that support that number of 20 is that there is a variable that happens in a volunteer department on recruitment and retention. We lose some, we recruit some. What we want to ensure as you move forward is that you sustain a minimum of 15 at all times, recognizing that there is this turnover rate. And the turnover rate in a volunteer fire department in Ontario is quite commonly between 20 and 25. So that's why we've used the 20 instead of the minimum of 15 to substantiate and ensure on a go-forward basis. Okay? So again, on the administration and staffing section, these recommendations are both highlighted in blue, meaning that they are council directed recommendations. Very much what we just spoke to, the volunteer firefighters at each station be approved at 20. And the next one being, as I spoke to briefly, that the department senior management team be implemented, including the fire chief and the 3 proposed volunteer assistant chiefs. And as we've identified, that those positions of volunteer assistant chief be excluded from the membership in the Volunteer Firefighters Association. This is not compensation driven. It's not intended to be any disrespect to the association whatsoever. It's very much driven by a need, in our view, to have a stronger, more effective and efficient administrative team able to lead and deal with the operations of a very significant sized fire department. It also provides the opportunity to provide some, what I'd suggest, redundancy at the level of fire chief in the event that the fire chief was to be sick or away from the township. This organization model would, on a rotating basis, allow one of those assistant chiefs to act in the position of the fire chief, so that all times you have one of the members of the senior administration team within the fire department readily available to council. Now that's an operational need on a day-to-day from a firefighting perspective, but it's also an important element of the township's emergency planning, in that you rely on the fire department to look after your community emergency management plan. So there are some rationale that are contained within the report and evidence that supports why we've taken you down this path. Any questions on that particular slide? These next 2 recommendations are black, so very much recommendations we think are certainly within the current delegation of the fire chief. The first being that consideration be given to utilizing the recruitment and retention strategies for volunteer, or quite commonly referred to as part-time firefighters, included within the Alberta Volunteer Firefighter Recruitment and Retention Strategy. This strategy was developed in Alberta by the Alberta Fire Chiefs Association a number of years ago. It's recently been adopted by the Canadian Association of Fire Chiefs. We have applied it and used it in our work out in Western Canada. We think it's a very valuable document to assist you in looking at strategies, how you can enhance and or improve the recruitment and retention of volunteer firefighters. I can tell you that in our experience, historically, and if I go back in my career, as you may remember, my father was a volunteer firefighter, I was a volunteer firefighter. Historically, we had the 25, 30, 35-year volunteer firefighter. We're not seeing that type of candidate any longer. We do very, very well in the service to retain a firefighter for 10 to 15 years in the volunteer service. We have to recognize that. We have to change our recruitment and retention strategies to address the fact that we are going to have a 25% turnover rate annually. We need to prepare for that. It's part of doing business in 2016. Recommendation number 7 talks about your current fire dispatch protocols. You may recall that in the fire master plan there was a lot of discussion about what was described as unknown 911 calls. I know that the retired fire chief did a lot of work and analysis on these calls, and our report indicates they have diminished quite significantly. You have a lot less of them in 2015 and 16 than you had in 2014. However, there are still some there. We believe they are as a direct result of the protocols that are in place within St. Catharines Dispatch Center that dispatches the calls. And so we think your first step should be for the fire chief to go have that conversation and just talk about changes of the evolution of the dispatch protocols. Any questions on the recommendations? Okay. Number 8 being it's subject to your consideration of this plan that the fire chief be directed to update the current establishing and regulating bylaw. I'll speak to these 2 recommendations together. Your current establishing and regulating bylaw is dated in 2006. It's 10 years old. In our view, it does not reflect the current levels of service or types of services that you provide to the community. It certainly doesn't reflect your current organizational model, and obviously it would not recognize the organizational model that we're recommending. One of the interesting elements of this review has been that attached to that 2006 establishing and regulating bylaw, fire service strategic plan. It was reviewed and adopted and approved by council back in 2006. In our view, it's a very well done fire strategic plan. Our report recommends that as you go through your corporate strategic planning process, as you are right now, once you've completed that, you should consider updating the fire department strategic plan to align with that corporate document. It's a very, very good vision-making process and looking at the future. Any questions on that? Number 10. The fire chief be directed to enhance the current year-end reporting process to council to reflect the department annual report that includes a updated simplified risk assessment and additional multi-year analysis of services and programs. The basis of this recommendation is the fact that the Office of the Fire Marshal strongly suggests that a fire chief report to his council, his or her council, on an annual basis with the statistics analysis of what the department has done over the past 12 months, as well as updating the simplified risk assessment that you're legislatively required to have. Your current risk assessment is out of date. It has not been updated since the 2013 Fire Master Plan. And what this process allows a council to do is to identify some trend analysis. So for example, over the past 12 months, if we had seen an increase in a certain type of call or an increase in the number of calls in a specific area, it can help the fire chief and council to adapt your service delivery program, look at some different types of programs, specifically on the education and prevention area, to respond to that kind of trend analysis quickly versus leaving it for, say, a 3 to 5 period when you might come back and do a fire master planning update. Number 11 is a council-driven recommendation that we believe council should approve those strategic priorities that I identified to you at the onset of this report to guide the development and delivery of fire protection and emergency services. I would suggest to you and put forward the concept that as you go through this corporate strategic planning process that you've embarked on, that you consider those strategic priorities in the concept of a corporate strategic plan. I just put that forward based on experience. There's a great overlap. There's an opportunity to connect the dots through that process. Any questions on those? Number 12, again in blue, a council recommendation. We're now looking on the fire suppression side, so very much about your firefighters. Number 12 being that the Township of Wainfleet benchmark its fire suppression initial response capabilities using the NFPA 1720 Rural Demand Zone deployment model of a minimum of 6 firefighters responding to all fire-related calls within a 14-minute response time, representing turnout time and travel time to 80% of the fire-related incidents. If I take you back to your 2013 Fire Master Plan, it did not get into an in-depth analysis of your actual service delivery on the fire suppression side. What we are presenting and recommending to you is that you implement some performance measures, some performance benchmarking to assess your capabilities. The NFPA, representing the National Fire Protection Association, is the most recognized fire standard setting organization within North America. Its composition is city managers, politicians, fire chiefs, and yes, full-time associations and volunteer associations. Your department and this NFPA standards for all of our training, certification, and training requirements now. NFPA is a recognized standard for performance. Initial response in this recommendation is directly related to the initial number of firefighters deployed to an incident. So that's the minimum that we would expect. This particular, what's called rural demand zone, is very much based on population density, which we have calculated across the entire township, and we would fall within this benchmark. Number 13 speaks to depth of response. Depth of response in the industry is directly related to the total number of firefighters deployed to a specific fire-related risk. So in addition to the initial response of 6 firefighters to a moderate risk occupancy, which the industry would define as a single-family dwelling, our recommendation is that you have a process in place where you know you are deploying a minimum of firefighters to effectively, efficiently, and safely mitigate a fire in a single-family residence. If that building happens to be defined as a high-risk occupancy, which would, in our industry, be defined as a care facility, so any type of a senior's residence, that deployment should be a minimum of 24 firefighters. And we recognize fully that that may be a difficult challenge for you to do on your own. But when it comes to care facilities or high-risk occupancies, one of the options we speak about in the body of the report is considering automatic aid with your neighboring communities so that upon that initial alarm, we are deploying that number of firefighters. I only need to take you to a number of coroner's inquests and significant fires across this country to suggest to you that those first few minutes of an incident in a care facility or a high-risk occupancy are critical to the outcome of the incident. And that's why we suggest such a deployment. Any questions on this?
I think we have Alderman Hessels and then Alderman Conk.
Going back to number 12 there, you're talking deployment of 6, a minimum of 6 firefighters. So is that, what is the deployment, on scene or fire hall? What are you relating to there?
6 firefighters responding to the scene and arriving on scene within a 14-minute response time, which includes turnout time and travel time.
Okay, on scene.
Okay.
Okay, that's and that's just fire-related incidents. So medical calls, there's no limits there.
Medical calls, motor vehicle accidents, a completely different element. When we look at the FPPA, it specifically deals with fire-related incidents. That's your legislated core service. Medical calls, motor vehicle accidents, that's an add-on service to what you're responsible for from a fire perspective. Okay?
Through you, Madam Mayor, I'm on number 12 as well. I don't disagree that these figures are correct. However, and I have no idea what number of volunteers can come out during the day, during the week, when probably most of them work. So how do we mitigate that when most of our volunteers could be at work when there's a house fire during the day, during the week?
Through you, Madam Mayor, that gets into the deployment strategies that the fire chief, I'm sure, will work on. During the day, it may be a requirement within this township that you deploy all of your stations and all your apparatus Monday through Friday daytime. Then it'd be an automatic response. Versus during the evening and the weekend, the station located across the roadway may be able to do that on its own. There are statistics, analysis within the report. I'm certain the fire chief has the experience. That will be in your protocols on the dispatch side. In addition to that, increasing the complement of volunteers, so the pool from which you have to draw from, within the recruitment strategies we've identified, is to target some different demographics in the future that do address where your risks are, particularly Monday through Friday daytime.
Can I go back? You didn't answer my question about the program and if the fire prevention officer would be responsible for creating that program.
Councilor, I'm going to ask you to just, I'm going to hit it in a few minutes in the fire prevention section.
I think, yeah, we have one more from Alderman Hessel.
Well, going back to this deployment, so you're expecting 6 firefighters on scene. So if there's not 6 firefighters on scene, what happens? You're saying the deployment of 6 firefighters? Because there's been occasions here where you only get 2 or 3 people and you can do an exterior attack. So this number 6, I have some issues with it because I know in a perfect world you might get it, but out here we don't.
Through you, Madam Mayor, part of what we were engaged to do was to assess your legislative responsibilities under the FPPA and the Occupational Safety Act, and also to look at best practices. That's the slide in front of you, represents practices within this province. In my experience, and I may ask the fire chief to comment on this as well, in the event that you do have a challenge within this township, whereby there's an unfortunate incident, my expectation is this is the type of standard you are going to be held accountable to. Therefore, beginning to measure yourself and deploy yourself against that kind of a recognized standard is very much like my predecessor here tonight said, it's due diligence. And that's what we're asking you to implement. I agree completely with the council that Monday through Friday daytime, it may be challenging for you to deploy 6 firefighters. In the absence, my expectation is you are going to have very clear and defined operating guidelines that restrict what those firefighters can or cannot do when they get there. That is very much part of the health and safety of your firefighters and your responsibility as an employer.
Steve, can I just ask a question based on that? Does this not kind of go back to one of your earlier slides where you talk about encouraging current township employees to become volunteer firefighters so that if we have that instance in the day, God forbid something happens, we've got public works people who can go, we have Mike who can go, or whoever, our bylaw, our chief building official, because I know in the 2013 fire master plan, that was discussed and then we never really went anywhere with it, and I was glad to see it again on the slide, and I think if that's what you're saying, it's the whole big picture, so if we can get all these pieces together, then maybe, hopefully we can meet things like this.
Madam Mayor, one of the challenges that our industry is having is the fact that we've looked at recruitment, retention, use of volunteer firefighters. We're looking at the same way we have for the last 50 years. And we have to change that. If we want to sustain the use of volunteers, we have to change the way we look at how we use them. And so I'll pick up on what you just said. Historically, we've looked at recruiting volunteer firefighters within a certain geographic area of a fire station. And if they lived outside of that area, then we didn't recruit them. The 2013 Fire Master Plan very much focuses on where the volunteers at that time lived. Well, my suspicion is they don't all live in the same place in 2016. Another element of that is the fact that, I think you have an excellent opportunity with other township staff. They don't necessarily have to live within the township. Your goal for them is Monday through Friday daytime. That's when you're at your weakest point. If they go home to Welland or Port Colborne in the evening and the weekend, you have other volunteers that will be there. It's finding that balance that addresses this kind of a deployment that will help you sustain this model in the future. I think the chief wants to step in.
Your worship, through you to possibly address some of Alderman Hassel's concerns with the minimum of 6 firefighters. Please take the whole recommendation in full context. But part of that also relates to the 80% response percentile. So as you mentioned, there would be occasions where there might be a situation where there would be less than that. That is actually considered within the context of what the standard is. So it's not 100%, but it also then provides us with a benchmark that if the department does not achieve the 80%, then that is a goal then that perhaps we need to look at what we're doing in order to make that achievement. It's not an expectation to achieve it 100% of the time.
Okay. Okay, so 14, obviously a council one. The Township of Wainfleet consider approving the implementation of the proposed alternate 3-station model presented with the plan. I have another slide that I'll speak to that in more detail. Number 15 speaks to the fact that during this process, we have been consulting with and speaking with Kalos Engineering that is working on your station renewal plan. We have just identified that the 2013 Fire Master Plan and the 2016 review that we've done, be sure that we provide those to Kalos because they both have elements on the design build components of what we are anticipating be included within the new fire stations. Just hold your thoughts for a second because on the next page, what we have identified within the report, and there is a number of different models within the report, both looking at your existing conditions in the 4-station model, alternate 3-station model. We believe the most effective and optimal model for you to move forward towards is building a new fire station of Station 3 out by the lake, consolidate Station 1 and 4 in the location of the existing Station 1, and then sustaining the use of Station 2, which is across the street here. If you go back to the 2013 Fire Master Plan, we're very similar to what the recommendations of that report were, except for that rather than moving the consolidated Station 1 and 4 to a Chambers Corners location, we think it would be a more optimal response capability if you use the current site at Station 1. And there is analysis and modeling of those two standards that we just presented to you that reflect it is the most optimal location. You own that property. It may require some procurement of some additional property depending on your site plan configuration. But in the long term, that's where we believe you should go, and it is supported by the organizational model we presented. Any questions on that element?
I've got Alderman Hessels to start.
Okay, first of all, you say that's the model. You leave the whole northwest end of the township unprotected according to the insurance policy that I had. So you're talking in your report being efficient and doing what's best for the community. So you've actually downgraded with your model there the whole northwest portion of the township. And when we go back, and what I seen was your biggest reason was recruitment of volunteers. But if I look at our last road call, Station 1 and Station 4, we probably have about the same amount of people in. Brings me to another point. What has been done to, what efforts have been done for recruitment for that? Because the one in 2013, it kind of put that whole area there that was covered by Engine 4. And if you look right now, there's a lot of overlap with Station 2 and Station 1 would be. There wouldn't be much overlap if Station 4 was there to Station 2. So I don't know, I have some real concerns with this one. For one, you're downgrading the protection for the whole northwest part of the township.
Madam Mayor, through you, I can assure the councillor that in no way does this plan downgrade any level of service within this township. The model presented to you improves the level of service at its optimal implementation across the entire township. Station 4, as it stands today, does not have any insurance certification or qualification at all because it only has 5 firefighters. Once we consolidate to 2 stations and enhance the effectiveness of that station, The analysis, as you will see when you get into the report, is quite actually a significant improvement to the services across the entire township in this model.
Yeah, if I may continue, I'd have to contradict you because I have talked to my insurance agency, and if we're not within 5 kilometers of a fire hall, we are unprotected. So
Through you, Madam Mayor.
that's my insurance company. You say different, but that's my insurance company.
Through you, Madam Mayor, I think we would have to get into the conversation about whether or not that fire station is currently recognized by the insurance industry. And I would suggest to you at this moment in time, it is not. It may be there, but there is only 5 volunteer firefighters assigned, so it's not. So I understand what Councilor's saying on his insurance, but what I'm sure insurance advisor may not understand is that that station is not currently recognized. Under this plan, I can assure you that with the complement of firefighters assigned to the station we're recommending, in the location we're recommending, with the apparatus we are recommending, it will be an improvement to the fire service, and it will be an improvement to the insurance within the township, particularly if we look at another recommendation within this report, which is moving towards the Superior Tanker Shuttle accreditation.
Is there any way before we come back on the 25th with a report to find out from insurance companies? Because I know, like Alderman Hessels had made a phone call, and I remember years ago phoning about sewer and water, and because the region would say, so I get your point that the insurance company might not understand, but then again, they might. Like I remember calling my insurance company and asking about fire hydrants and how much that would reduce, and it wasn't as much as the region had said. So I think it would be worth, like it's a valid question, it would be worth maybe, I don't know if that would fall on us to kind of maybe find out that information from now until then, even just a couple phone calls. But I think it is, because we have heard people talk about their insurance rates and so forth in the township as it relates to fire services. So even for myself, many things going on, but maybe that's even something that we can discuss offline. So if you're good with that, Alderman Hessels, we can look into that a bit further.
I recommended, I have called 2 different insurance companies, and they both told me the same thing. Removing a fire hall will affect your insurance rates.
Okay. Alderman Gilmore.
Madam Mayor, before we leave that,
Sure.
We can certainly provide a contact information to the insurance setting body. The fire chief knows who I'm speaking to. I'm sure he can make that contact and give you some more background information in the analysis.
Okay, that sounds great. Alderman Gilmore.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Steve, can you expand on the rationale for choosing, I mean, I understand the consolidation aspect, choose to consolidate and locate in 1 versus 4. Maybe the rationale behind that would be helpful.
Okay, so if you go back to the 2013 Fire Master Plan, it recommended the same strategy of consolidating 4 in 1, but developing the new station at the Chambers Corner site. What we looked at, quite frankly, is those benchmarks I presented to you, that's 6 firefighters in 14 minutes, and particularly the 2 elements. So the turnout time of our predictor for the volunteers to get to the fire station, really important element of this conversation, and then how far can they travel in the remainder of that 14 minutes. We know that today, Station 4, which is the Northwest Station, at its maximum only has 5 firefighters. And since 2013, you've tried, to my knowledge, to recruit in that area 3 times with no success. So we are behind the benchmark before we even start, because we don't have the pool from which to draw from. So by consolidating them, keeping them further to west in this location, in our view, as you will see within the analysis of a number of different options, it's the most optimal location that gives us the best coverage for the entire township. Councilor's right. There is some overlap, and there will always be overlap when you do this kind of modeling. We try to minimize it. We could have moved the station a little bit further to the west. Then we would have been into a property allocation, and we would have had a much more significant capital cost for very little increased operation efficiency. We believe this is the optimal.
Thank you. Just to follow up then, so just to summarize, the basic problem with the current location of Station 4 and the direction that council previously took, based on the 2013 plan, to first begin to rebuild Burnaby and Wellenport. In your opinion, the basic problem is not so much the physical location, but the number of people that are available to report to that location. Is that a fair summary?
Councillor, it's a combination of both. Once you have a chance to review the analysis, you'll see that we look at both the infrastructure of the buildings. They both reach their life. All of your stations are reaching or attained their life expectancy. There is a need for renewal. We have looked at your historical data on how many firefighters actually respond to a call. So yes, we may have 5 at one station or 15 or 20 in another station. We've looked at your historical data of how many we actually got so that we can predict in the future what our benchmarks are against that 6 and 14. And we've also looked at within the report, and you'll see we've analyzed the 5-kilometer, 8-kilometer distances from these locations to ensure we have optimally located them to give the best coverage within the township.
Did anybody else have any questions on this slide? Alderman Hessels?
I did bring it up before, like the recruitment part. I don't know what kind of effort was put into it. If there was a real effort put into any certain halls, I'm not sure how the effort was. I'm looking at our last road call. Station 1 has 6, and actually Station 4 has 6 now. We just had a guy from another area move in there. So we're pretty well even there. There isn't any station. I look at Station 2's got 12, and I think Station 3 has 10. So none of these stations make up it. And that's why I think if you put the station at, well, I'd like to see all 4 stations stay, and I think this is something that needs to go to the public. It's the public purse that's flipping the bill for this, and if they don't have the big issues with it, I think that would be a driving force on which direction we go to.
Okay, thank you. So any other questions? Okay, seeing none, we'll just move on.
Okay, so number 16, now we're into the training and education element. That the department developed comprehensive annual training program based on the current NFP professional qualification standards and the core functions of a comprehensive training program identified within our plan. So within the body of the report, you will see elements of what we believe should be included within an annual training program. There are elements of that we believe need to be done consistently every year. There are certainly some that can be spread out over a longer time. From a health and safety perspective, in 2016, as an employer, it is very important that we have the documentation and training program that the volunteer firefighters that we put in a position have the skills and competencies to do what we expect them to do. I can't emphasize that enough. I think it falls on the template that our audit has given you. This is a very, very key element for you. Number 17 speaks to the fact that in 2013 there was some discussion and identification of opportunities for a training ground. And this one talks about a recommendation that you investigate partnership opportunities for developing a joint fire training ground with both the private sector and other public sector partners, including neighborhood fire services. There may be some opportunities right down the street for you once you get out talking to the private sector. We're not talking about $1 million training center. We're talking about filling a need that the department has for doing hands-on training, and if possible, some type of live fire training on a regular basis. Again, this supports the need for and the legislative requirement on the training side. One of the things that we need to recognize in the industry, and it's happening every day, is the fact that we are doing well as an industry in reducing the number of actual fires. our hats off to the industry. On the flip side, that means we're not exposing our firefighters as regularly as we would have historically to actual firefighting events. It raises the importance of training, particularly in volunteer service. Any questions on those two slides?
Did anyone have any questions on this one? I actually did, if you don't mind. So you're talking about a joint fire training ground or partnership with the public sector. So you're not necessarily suggesting that we, the township, provide that? Because in the past, I have had discussions with some of the volunteer firefighters about, it's been an ongoing request because they don't feel they have adequate area. And so I know when we've originally been talking about the fire stations and rebuilding, that's been something that we've kind of kept in the back of our mind. So you're suggesting that that's not the way to go then, and to do some sort of a partnership? Okay.
So there was a discussion within the 2013 plan, Your Worship, about a partnership with the quarry and access to that type of property. Those are the kinds of leads we think you should endeavor to pursue. Having this type of a training ground directly associated with a fire station may meet the needs of the fire service, but I can tell you through experience, it raises the neighborhood challenges of the noise and to find that balance. Okay? Number 18, again, directed to the fire chief that consider further use of online training programs as a component of what we've suggested. We are finding within the industry, and it's relevant within this department, there are not enough hours in a month to do all of the training for a volunteer firefighter. We have to find a balance between how many hours a volunteer firefighter can give to a community. Training is becoming a more significant element. What we are recommending to all of our clients is that we try to separate the theoretical elements of training and wherever possible put them online. There are very good programs out there to do this, and keep those evenings and weekends when we're together and concentrate on the practical training elements. Number 19 speaks to the fact that consider the areas of specialized services to be provided by the department for consider and approval of council. I'm sorry, I've had a long day. Inclusion within an updated establishing regulating bylaw. The focus of this recommendation is that in addition to firefighting and medical responses and motor vehicle accidents, you get called to all sorts of different calls. Hazardous materials type calls, you have a risk with water type associated calls. We call them specialized services. In our view, there are some of those where there is a need to have that kind of training and services. There are others where we think you could partner either with the private sector or other neighboring fire services to work together to provide those. An example of one of those would be what we call confined space rescue. A worker in a trench gets trapped. From an occupational safety perspective, that is a significantly technical rescue. It would be very difficult for you to receive that type of training and sustain it in a volunteer department, let alone have the equipment necessary to complete that kind of a rescue effectively. You have major departments within the region that have this risk and could provide it to you either on a contract basis or an automatic aid basis. We're suggesting you pursue those kinds of opportunities. Any questions? Okay. So very much on what I just said, this recommendation simply expands it. If you look at other options such as implementing agreements with neighboring communities or the private sector for any service that required above the awareness level. Now, all firefighters need to have a certain awareness so they recognize what they are faced with. So if it is a confined space rescue, any firefighter should be able to recognize that that's what it is. That's the awareness level. Once you start to do something, then it becomes either an operational or a technical level. And that's where we want you to investigate what levels of service you're going to provide and look for partnerships where there's not that kind of risk on an everyday basis within the community. The next one deals with your responsibility, in our view, from a supervisory perspective, and I'm going to build on the theme of occupational health and safety, that you provide training opportunities for company officers to achieve the competencies identified within the new NFPA 1021 standard. You have to continue to recognize that in each firefighting crew, there needs to be a qualified supervisor. So not necessarily the fire chief or an assistant chief, but someone in that crew has to have the skills and competencies that you give them as an employer from a health and safety perspective. They are the supervisor. Part of this company officer standard will give you that kind of training. Any questions? Okay. Number 22 is one way that we do that is through enhancing operating guidelines. We have identified a gap in your current operating guidelines with respect to establishing incident command, which is very much that supervisory element. We're recommending that operating guidelines be updated to assist on the incident command, where we as an industry are very aware of certain types of programs. This is one called the Blue Card Fire Training Program, very effectively used in volunteer departments to support their company officer training program. We're suggesting that the fire chief investigate this and look at the application of that for your department. Any questions on that?
I apologize. If we just go back to the previous slide, and you were talking about the training opportunities for company officers. So, sorry, company officers are?
Anyone with the rank of an officer, your captains,
okay.
District chiefs.
So having said that, what happens, I know I've heard, and maybe I see we have a few volunteers here tonight, maybe I have this wrong, but it's been mentioned before that some people are leery about taking on certain leadership roles because of the risk of liability to them. So what happens if we can't encourage some, like the volunteers that we need to take on more of these leadership roles? And then that probably even goes back to some of the questions maybe Alderman Conk had earlier about, I want to say district chiefs, is that what they're called? Assistants, sorry. So what, is that possible that we wouldn't get enough people? And how do you ease their mind, I guess, for lack of a better word, that you know, I mean, it's always an issue with anything you do, even inviting guests to your home, there's a certain liability, but I see their point, and I apologize I had to make you go back a slide, but it was kind of a delayed reaction to that.
Through you, Madam Mayor. I think you hit the nail on the head. Ease their mind is the key to that answer. I think it's a question of improving and enhancing the communication of what's expected upon them, and supporting that by having the right training programs and support mechanism process. And based on your historic history, I don't think that's been in place. Based on the volunteers I have met and consulted with, you have the people, you have very competent people. I think there's been a gap on the leadership side, and I think by addressing that kind of a communication and having these kinds of programs like the Blue Card training program, it will help to ease and reduce a lot of those fears. Chief, any comment on that one? You have some history there.
Your Worship, I think there's a couple of pieces. One is building confidence within the individuals and providing that training. The other piece that is the assumption of liability, and the assumption of liability is generally based around the recognition of negligence. So providing people are acting within their level of experience and not doing something that they should know or ought to know that they should not be doing, then they should not be found negligent. Under the Act, there was a component called an indemnification section, which would provide protection to firefighters, provide indemnification to them, provided they are not being negligent in the delivery of their duties. So that is also provided there under the Act.
Thank you.
So number 24 is that the township policies referring to volunteer firefighter minimum training attendance be revised to ensure that within any calendar year, a volunteer firefighter is required to complete 100% of the department's minimum training standard. Now, let's just be clear here. I'm not suggesting in any way that a volunteer firefighter has to attend every Wednesday night or Tuesday night, but within a training program, there are key elements that we have to ensure that are maintained and sustained regularly, and those are the elements that we are suggesting need to be 100%. Your current policy reflects a 60%. It's too broad. It needs to be redefined and bring it closer. Number 25 speaks to the fire chief be directed to develop a department operating guideline defining the goals, objectives, and procedures for completing the collecting firefighter training records. This is a gap that you have. We need to have a lot more due diligence, as the previous speaker said, on the training record side, particularly in the fire department. Number 26 is highlighted in blue because it's one that we are suggesting is directly to council, that the proposed training staff resource plan contained within our review be considered for implementation. So very much like in the prevention side, we've identified some additional certification and training for people who will be delivering the training program. And as a result of that, we've identified that some of those positions should have part-time hours associated with them. So not moving towards full-time, but recognizing that it takes time in advance of a training exercise to develop what you're going to deliver, prepare for it to be delivered. And so you will see within the report a very clear, defined staff resource plan that supports the comprehensive annual training program that we're presenting. Mr. Member, I want to just make sure that we recognize this is a comprehensive document, and there are a lot of pieces to this puzzle. I am sure when the fire chief comes forward with his implementation plan, not all of this is going to be accomplished within the next 365 days. We need to recognize that from the onset. But some of these need to be prioritized. On the training side, I would suggest that's one you want to really strongly consider. Any questions? Okay. Number 27. You have an agreement, you certainly know, with the City of St. Catharines on dispatch. We've reviewed that agreement from a best practices perspective. It doesn't include any performance benchmarks. With a city the size of St. Catharines and the number of dispatch agreements they have, we're suggesting to you that when that agreement comes up for renegotiation, you try to, if you can, negotiate some performance benchmarks into that agreement. In other words, an expected level of service. Number 28 deals with, on the technology side, you are part of a regional radio system that the fire chief be directed to consult further with St. Catharines with respect to upgrading or replacement of the current fire services radio system and report back to council. In the 2013 Fire Master Plan, it identifies that there are some gaps in coverage within the township. Those are still in place. Very much like Bell Telephone said to you tonight, there are some gaps. There will always be some gaps. In addition to that, you have some hardware in the radio system that is reaching the end of its life expectancy. We need to start looking at a replacement plan for that. In the interim, in a recommendation I'm about to give to you, we need to develop some operating guidelines to protect our staff as we work through this transition. This is a big project. It's not going to happen overnight. But in the interim, we need to recognize from a due diligence perspective, we do have some gaps. Any questions? Okay. So this next one deals specifically with that. That your radio including training requirements and pre-planning and other interim strategies such as the use of cellular telephones to maintain firefighter safety be implemented. So there is a recognition in 2013 that you have some radio transmission gaps. Those are still in place. We need to develop some due diligence through an operating guideline, firefighters some alternate tools to ensure that they continue to operate safely. In addition to that, on the technology side, number 30 speaks about directing the fire chief to investigate the use of alternate technology to improve or enhance the current volunteer pager system. Again, this is a future issue we are going to need to address. There are a lot of new technologies coming on stream with volunteer pager systems. I'd suggest that's directly related to your use of St. Catharines as a dispatch agency. I'm just suggesting that you put this on your work plan as you move forward. Any questions? Number 31, and we're getting closer to Councillor question. Subject to council considering of 2016 plan that the fire chief be directed to update the current fire prevention policy and establishing a regulating body. There's an important element of this process, which is linked to your 2013 plan, that council, through the development and approval of a fire prevention policy, set the level of services that you're going to provide. At a minimum, that includes completing a simplified risk assessment, having a home smoke alarm program, distributing public education material, and doing inspections upon complaint or request. What the fire marshal's office is looking for is all of that to be contained within a fire prevention policy, approved by council, and set within the establishing regulating body. You do not currently have that in place. Number 32 speaks to considering approval of proposed public fire safety education activities and program cycle objectives to be included within this updated fire prevention policy. What the report contains is a cycle based on major occupancies within the township for how often and to which demographics we think you should be providing public education programs. I think your fire prevention officer is well informed on this. I think she does an excellent job towards this. I think what would help her in doing her job as she moves forward is further guidance with respect to council's expectations and aligning with your legislative responsibilities. That's what this is intended to do. Any questions? Almost there. As you look at this, updating your fire prevention policy, there is a public fire safety guideline that we've included. I'm quite sure the fire chief is very familiar with this and that you apply this and use it as you develop and update the policy. Number 34, similar to the public education objectives, we have identified some proposed fire inspection goals and objectives, including regular cycles for fire inspections, depending on the type of occupancy. Some of those are legislated, particularly in care facilities, and we've identified what we believe to be best practices for you based on a comparable list of communities with your type of fire risk and your type of geography and building style. Any questions?
Sorry, I should look to council first. Just with the fire inspections, we've had times where that's been controversial with some of our business owners and different people in the community. And I don't even really know what I'm asking you, but we get questioned on whether that is legislated. And we had an incident where it was difficult to get a straight answer for the person who had emailed and was asking about it. So I don't know, maybe there's a way we can communicate to the community the reasoning behind this as we, I mean, we're still doing it, but as we move forward with it, because they call council and then we say, well, it's part of the 3 lines of defense and the public education. But we've been questioned. I know Alderman Gilmore was part of the one that had contacted us, and when we really, I felt as council and township, we didn't really have a strong answer for this gentleman, so it's made me question it a little bit.
Madam Mayor, so a couple of elements to that. Number one is that guideline in recommendation 33 will help you. It gives you some tools and strategies on how to deal with it. On the flip side, I suggest that through this kind of process, educating the community and some of the business owners on the fire inspection, fire code responsibilities is going to be a key element of this as you go forward. We're finding that with all of our clients. As we as an industry, begin to emphasize the first two lines of defense, then compliance or inspection, become quite a interesting conversation. How we communicate that is a key to this. I agree 100%. Any other questions? Okay, number 35. That once you are able to get this fire prevention policy in place, that the fire chief develop operating guidelines for fire investigations, including origin and cause determination, and the training and accreditation required to conduct those. You are legislatively required to conduct origin and cause determination of a fire. That requires some specific skill sets and training and certification. It also requires a very clear operating guideline for when you would do that and how you would do that. That needs to be put in place. Number 36 is very much what Councillor Hawk has been waiting for, that consideration be given to implementing the staff resource plan identified within the operation review to achieve the fire inspection and public education performance levels recommended. So, within this plan, we are recommending you further enhance the type of inspection programs you do, the type of education programs you do, and to support that, the transition of your part-time fire inspector over the next 3 years to becoming a full-time position. This fully supports that strategic priority about optimizing the first 3 lines of defense. It is linked to the fact that we've had discussion tonight about the challenges this township has on the deployment of volunteer firefighters, particularly Monday through Friday daytime. We recognize that you have that challenge. It puts more emphasis on education and prevention and the application of those first 2 lines of defense. To effectively do that, in our view, means you need to consider transitioning that position to full-time to achieve that kind of service level and that kind of an effective overall fire protection model. It's not just about firefighters, it's about enhancing and, quite frankly, changing human behavior with respect to fire within the community. Councilor, does that answer your question?
Not really.
Okay, then how can I answer your question? Because this is the recommendation.
Find it. Through you, Madam Mayor. The question was, what would the program look like, and would the fire prevention officer be the person responsible for creating that particular program?
So,
I'm sorry you answered, but not really.
the framework of the program is identified within the body of the report on the specifics of how often we would see education programs delivered to different demographics and different building occupancies, and how often we would see fire inspections delivered, again, to a range of different building stock and major occupancies. All that's contained within the plan. The person we see delivering that plan is very much the fire inspector, because there's a required level of certification and training to meet your legislative responsibilities to do that. Okay? Any other questions on this slide? On the apparatus and equipment perspective of the fleet, we're recommending consider transitioning the major fleet, so your pumpers, which is the backbone of the fire service, to a combination of pump rescues. The industry is transitioning from what we used to call single-purpose apparatus, so rescue trucks or pumpers or even tankers, into multi-use vehicles. If this was a large city or you were a very large fire department, we may have a conversation about single-purpose vehicles. You're not. You're a volunteer fire department, and the application of multi-purpose vehicles is where we believe you need to go in the future, and the use of combination pump rescues is the way we think you need to do that. You have a limited resource pool on the firefighting side, so we have to provide the most effective apparatus that meets their needs when they get to a fire scene or a motor vehicle accident. Number 38 that talks about implementing multi-use vehicles. We've identified and actually defined what we believe is a multi-use vehicles. within your current operating model, and it has come to be as through your historical transition to the model you have, your volunteer firefighters currently will deploy to a fire scene or any type of incident in their personal vehicles. It's our view that we strongly advise you start to mitigate or reduce the reliance on that plan. It can lead to occurrences whereby we don't have volunteer firefighters actually attending the fire station and getting the apparatus. A minimum pool, you have to make sure that you're appropriately staffing the apparatus you have. That's one side of the challenge. The other side of the challenge is when we do training events or practical training, we want to make sure that all of the volunteers can participate and attend. It's not uncommon looking at historical patterns that on a training evening, you can have all of the volunteers at a particular station come to train that night. They want to participate. In order to accommodate that, we would prefer they not use personal vehicles to transport township equipment either to a call, from a call, to a training event, or from a training event. We've identified and strongly recommend that as you move forward, you look at a multi-use type of vehicle. And again, it could very effectively provide very different options for you as you look forward. The vehicle that we talked about is typical to a four-wheel drive, 6-man cab type of large pickup with some cast capacity in the back for adding additional supplemental equipment you don't have today, like wildland firefighting. We've identified that. Number 39 speaks to the fact that under your current apparatus, you don't have any reserve. When a pump, which is your primary firefighting vehicle, goes out of service, either for maintenance or repair or it's down, in today's model, you actually take that fire station out of service from a firefighting perspective. So we're suggesting that as you begin to replace your fleet, at a minimum, you develop some redundancy, some capacity to have at least one reserve pumper. Any questions? Okay. Number 40 simply speaks to the fact that we have provided within the report a proposed apparatus replacement plan based on some life cycle planning and the life cycle expectancy of your current fleet to match with what we just recommended. And that on the smaller equipment side, number 41, you look at life cycle replacement planning for all the larger cost elements such as firefighter bunker gear, self-contained breathing apparatus, and you develop that plan based on industry best practices and manufacturer's recommendations. Again, this is part of moving forward on a capital replacement plan. It's going to avoid you getting into a position where you have outdated equipment and giving you more flexibility, quite frankly, as part of the fleet. Any questions? Okay. Now, to support everything I just said in the past recommendations is that council look at developing a dedicated fire and emergency services capital replacement reserve fund as part of a financial strategy for implementing all of the recommendations I've just presented to you. Any question on that one? Now, on the water supply and the tanker side. So very much looking from an insurance perspective, as the 2013 plan did, we're suggesting that the fire chief be directed to develop a business plan, identifying what the operational and financial requirements would be for the department to seek the Superior Tanker Shuttle accreditation. This accreditation, if successfully achieved, and I can tell you that the majority of our volunteer fire department clients have achieved it, and it can be achieved by your fire department, will provide some insurance credit to a large number of the constituents or residents of this township. It will require some work. It will require some change in equipment. And as number 44 speaks to, it will more than likely lead to you needing to collaborate with your neighboring fire services on an automatic aid agreement. I can tell you in my experience in this industry that this is a very, very effective strategy to enhance your firefighting capabilities and one that has a direct benefit to the residents within the community. Any questions on that one?
Madam Mayor, can you give the folks out in the audience an idea of what a superior tanker shuttle accreditation might be?
So in simple terms, what it means is the capability of the fire department to respond to a fire-related call with a water supply, a mobile water supply in tankers, whereby once they get to that fire scene, they can establish an uninterrupted flow of water to that fire for a certain amount of time. So you may see it on the news quite often, whereby fire departments get together. They will use tankers to shuttle water from a water source to the fire scene. Use portable swimming pools to capture the water and provide a capability as if there was actually a fire hydrant on the street, which creates that uninterrupted water stream. And the insurance industry, if you can successfully achieve this accreditation, will reflect in a reduction in insurance rates where it's applicable. There are some restrictions on distances and identification of water sources, but in my experience, your township is well positioned to take on this kind of a strategy.
I just wanted to ask, I was under the impression that around 2011, 2012, we did have this accreditation, or we were really close. The chief of the day had been, I remember having it was Chris Cole, having a conversation about him, and I thought we had achieved that or a certain level of it. I don't know if anybody remembers that. Am I the only one? I know I didn't imagine that conversation, so maybe that's something that I can find out after. But I thought we were close to that at one point.
That didn't come up in the consultation or the research. I'm sure the fire chief could check the records and see if there's anything that's on record as of having it. I assure you don't have it right now. Any questions on that? Other questions? I'm done, right?
Okay, thanks for that presentation. Are there any further questions from council members? Alderman Conk.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. In the body of this particular report, there's at least 9 directions for the fire chief. Is there a timeline that is expected for the fire chief to accomplish these 9 directions? And I'd also like to know if the fire implementation committee has been provided with this particular report.
So through you, Madam Mayor, to Alderman Khan, I can respond to the second component of that question, and then I'll let the chief comment on the implementation of the recommendations, because it does speak in the report to that. So to the second question around the Fire Master Plan Implementation Committee is yes, they were emailed a copy of the report earlier this day.
Through you, Your Worship, to Alderman Kong, I think in terms of an implementation strategy, that certainly would be something that we will have to look at going forward. If council was to give direction that these would be all recommendations that we would proceed with, we would have to look at prioritizing them, utilizing some of the additional information that's available to look at strategies as to how long and set a time frame to be able to go and do that. At this point, we're not. I haven't got that far advanced through this process, but that will be part of the next steps as we go forward.
Thank you.
Okay, any further questions from council members? Okay, seeing none, so we've got the report on the floor, and like the CAO had said in the beginning, that it was a receipt for information and giving the chief direction to go ahead and work on a report that identifies how we're going to deal with all these recommendations, and then that is gonna come back on the 25th, and then at that time, we can discuss that and decide what to do with it. So those are the three key pieces in the recommendation. So if there aren't any further questions or discussion, then I will call a question on that. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? And that's carried. Okay, so now I guess we will move on to correspondence.
Report of correspondence to council dated October 4th, 2016, and the recommendations contained therein be adopted as circulated.
I need a mover and a seconder. Alderman Conk and Alderman Gilmore. So this should be the last time we have correspondence. That way we just have to approve the bylaw tonight, the third reading, because I asked that in our pre-council meeting. I politely said, why is it like this again? And then Sarah explained. So this will be the last night, as far as I know, that we're going to go through these things one by one. So having said that, I can start it off with 309 from the town of Aurora, and that was an OMB, a letter regarding the OMB. And Sarah, I don't know, you explained it to me in our pre. If you don't mind, just quickly, kind of, I'm sure everybody's read it, but giving from your planning angle, your perception of that.
So through you, Madam Mayor, to all council, so the town of Aurora feels that the jurisdiction of the Ontario Municipal Board should be limited to questions of law and process. So much like any other decision made by a municipal council via bylaw, and any sort of appeal or question as to that decision is done, it's done through a judicial review. And when that happens, they are only looking at law and process. So the town of Aurora has kind of spearheaded this movement that the Ontario Municipal Board should be the same. So this would mean that the OMB would be required to uphold any planning decision made by a municipal council, unless there were decisions, unless the decision was contrary to process and the rules set out in legislation. So, for example, if an application wasn't circulated within the specified circulated within the statutory timelines, or public notice wasn't given in accordance with the regulations, then the OMB would be able to look at the appeal. And this kind of movement stems from concerns that the OMB isn't reviewing these appeals of municipal decisions from the local perspective.
So I don't know if anybody wants to make a motion then to, like, we can just receive it for information or support it. So whatever. So Alderman Conk, are you to support it? Yes. Okay. I had a feeling you would. Can I get a seconder for that? Alderman Gilmore. And I'll call the question. All those in favor? And that's carried. And then we had 310, and that was to receive for information. However, I did get an email from Lori Kleinsmith asking if it was going to be on our council and encouraging us to support it. So Port Colborne has supported it, and then we would then in turn support this regarding the expanding the public oral health programs. So if we want to do that, then I'd ask for a motion for somebody to make a motion to change this to support. Okay, Alderman Conk, thank you. Is there a seconder for that? Alderman Gilmore. So I'll call the question. All those in favor? And that's carried. And then we have 310. And this one is a referred council. So I was actually a member of this at one time, and then we decided that I would, 311? Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, 311. I apologize. So then we decided I would not be a member of this, but now, so I'm sure some of you have been following this town that wants to take water out of the Great Lakes and everything. So I've been pushed by a couple other mayors, particularly the one in Fort Erie, or not pushed, but suggested that it would be important to be part of this. Mike and I had a discussion. It's a time-consuming thing, and I know, again, that council didn't really think it was necessary a couple budgets ago, so we removed it. So we're just wondering about maybe changing the recommendation of this to kind of investigate this a little bit further, because it's just been really loose discussion. between myself and some of my colleagues at the region and then staff here. So I don't know if it's something that I'd even really have time to do, but we discussed that. Maybe we could look into that again. But I do think it's important considering we are a Great Lake municipality. I know we're one of the smaller ones, but we do have a stake in it for sure. So I don't know if anybody wants to move that to direct staff to investigate and then come back with a report about it, and we can talk about it further at that time. Okay, thanks, Alderman Conk. Is moving that motion then to investigate that further. Is there a seconder for that? Alderman Dykstra. So I will call the question. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? And that's carried. And then we have 312 from the city of Thorold. And I don't know if anybody's been following this, but this has been a pretty big deal for a lot of the residents in this area, so they're not happy about this incinerator. And I know it's kind of come to the region. We've had a lot of emails at the region about it, and then Thorold ended up saying that they were opposed to it, and now they've passed this resolution and are looking for support from the other municipalities against this form of incineration. So I know there's a lot of residents, and even some of our residents who are very environmentally inclined have been following this and going to some of the meetings. So it's a big topic across the region. So I don't know, again, I'm looking to somebody for a motion, whether you wish to support it or just receive it or what you wish to do. Alderman Conk?
I'm inclined to make a motion to just receive.
Okay, is there a seconder for that? Alderman, all those in favor? And that's carried. And then that takes us to the last one, and from Warren Howard regarding, so that's 315, information on the wind turbine noise emissions and health study. And so this will help to gain any funding from the province. Okay, so I don't know if anybody has any questions on this, but I guess I'll look to Alderman Conk to a motion to support this then. Okay, so I need a seconder for that. Alderman Dykstra, and then I will call the question. All those in favor, and that's carried. Now, so that left like two. I don't know if anybody had any other ones they wanted to discuss. Are we good on correspondence? Okay, then I will call the question on the correspondence as amended. All those in favor, and that's carried. And now we'll go into the bylaws.
Bylaw 69 separate.
That the bylaws be now read a third and final time this 4th day of October 2016. Bylaw 67 of 2016 being a bylaw to repeal and replace Bylaw 21, 2010 being a bylaw to govern the proceedings of the Township of Wainfleet Council, the conduct of its members and the calling of meetings. Bylaw 68, 2016 being a bylaw to establish a council correspondence policy for the corporation of the Township of Wainfleet.
Okay, so I need a mover and a seconder for those two bylaws. Alderman Conk and somebody, Alderman Dykstra. I'll call the question. All those in favor, and that's carried. And then now we'll read the last one.
That the following bylaw be read a third and final time this 4th day of October 2016. Bylaw 69, 2016 being a bylaw to amend Bylaw 89 of 2000 being a bylaw to regulate traffic and parking on township roads.
Okay, I need a mover and a seconder. Alderman Gilmore and Alderman Conk. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? And that's carried. So now we'll move into other business. Is there any other business tonight, Alderman Conk?
Through you, Madam Mayor, I'm just wondering if we, the township, might want to partner with the city of Port Colborne, and I do believe even Welland, with regards to the grandfathered licensed grow-ops within the municipalities. As everybody is well aware, Port Colborne had an armed robbery at one of their licensed grow-ops, and I was at council that night. I know I have no life. And from the description, it was quite traumatic. There were residents who had armed police officers dashing across their decks in the early morning hours, and it wasn't a pleasant experience from all accounts. So that particular night, Port Colborne Council put forward a motion to create a letter to the federal government to ask that these grandfathered marijuana grow-ops, licensed grow-ops, have their licenses removed. And I'm suggesting that we perhaps might want to do the same thing, because I know we have them here in Fleet.
Okay. So I'm not sure how we go about that. I know that if we wanted to kind of join, I don't know if we want to join in with them or do our own separate letter, or how that would look. I know it was suggested to me to contact the planner if we were going to do something along those lines in Port Colborne, but I think it's a good idea. It's just how are we going to do it, and I'm sure council will support that.
So through you, Madam Mayor, to comment, should council wish staff to investigate that and report back, we would require a motion on the floor in that specific direction approved by council, and we would follow that direction if it was the wish of council.
So you need direction to just look into it and then come back at the October 25th meeting? I'm just concerned that might be too, well, I guess, too late if we're going to do something with them, or are you suggesting that we just do something on our own?
Well, through you, Madam Mayor, I'm not sure which way is better through that, so I mean, council can either, if there's a timing issue, you can direct us to proceed in a particular direction, or you can give us delegated authority based on the research that we do to proceed in a certain direction, or we could report back at the next council meeting.
Okay. So I'll go to Alderman Hassels and then come back to Alderman Kunk.
I'm not so sure I have a problem with the grandfathering part. I have a problem with Health Canada, that they didn't do their due diligence on inspecting these properties. Like to take a business away from somebody because Health Canada didn't do their due diligence. So I wouldn't support that recommendation.
Okay, do you see the problem with it at all, or no? Like because...
Well, I see the problem with the government not doing inspections. If they had done their inspections, they would have caught that. And they're supposed to be doing inspections. So I think there was a follow-up in there somehow.
Well, it's my understanding that there's two pieces of legislation. There's older legislation and then there's newer legislation, and they're kind of caught in between it. And it also is a problem for the police, because they know, I don't think they really know. We had a big meeting with the staff sergeant in Port Colborne last year because we have a couple in Wainfleet, and there was a resident who was very upset about it, and there wasn't really a whole lot that could be done because of these two different pieces of legislation. And I can tell Mike wishes to comment.
Well, Madam Mayor, just procedurally, in order to have this discussion, council should put a motion and a seconder on the floor. Because if there isn't a mover and a seconder, then the conversation procedurally shouldn't be taking place.
Okay, thank you. So Alderman Kunk, do you wish to make a motion, and then we can have some further discussion?
Yes, through you, Madam Mayor, I would like to make a motion to direct staff to contact Port Colborne to find out exactly what it is that they're doing and the time frame that they're doing it in, and if it's advisable for them to have a second municipality support what they're doing, and if it's time sensitive for staff to go forward and do what needs to be done with regards to alerting the federal Ministry of Health about the concerns of the municipalities. Otherwise, bring us back a report for October the 25th.
Did you get that?
Through you, Madam Mayor, to Alderman Kong, just to clarify, we want to direct staff to basically contact Port Colborne, see what they're doing, see whether they require support, and bring back a report to that effect to council for the 25th.
If there's not a time factor involved. Yes.
And if there is a time factor involved, then to proceed how they...
Yes.
Okay. So we need a seconder for that motion. Alderman Dykstra. That's your name. So any discussion then on that motion? Because now we have, sorry about that. Okay. All right, seeing none, then I will call the question. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? And that's carried. Any further other business? Alderman Conk, did you have? No? Okay. Anybody else have other business? Okay, seeing none, then we are going to be moving into closed session, so I will hand it back over to Lee after he's done writing the novel that Alderman Conk dictated to him. So if you want to go ahead and read that.
The council now move in closed session to discuss an item under section 239, subsection 2B and D of the Municipal Act 2001, personnel matters about an identifiable individual, labor relations, or employee negotiations. Personnel matter, 3 items. Item under section 239, subsection 2C of the Municipal Act 2001, acquisition or disposition of land, potential disposition of land, 1 item. Adoption of the minutes of the closed meeting of council for September 13, 2016.
Okay, I need a mover and a seconder. Alderman Gilmore, Alderman Dykstra, all those in favor, and that's carried. And to the gallery, I'm not sure how long we'll be there. You're more than welcome to stay. We will be returning at some point. We do not have refreshments, I apologize, so we'll be back.